Welcome to another one of my versus game reviews where I pit two games against each other. This time we're putting Castlevania Rondo of Blood for the TurboGrafx CD against Castlevania Dracula X for the Super Nintendo. And by the way, don't confuse this for Dracula X Chronicles for the PSP, as they're completely different games. So, let's take a brief history of the two contenders. Rondo of Blood came out for the TurboGrafx CD. It is considered the bridge between classic Castlevania and the Iga Metroidvanias that the series would later morph into. While the stages are linear, they do have separate paths that lead to different bosses in different ways through the game. On top of that, you can unlock a second character early on in the game, Maria Reynard. Why would anyone want to play a Castlevania game as a little girl who throws birds? Simple answer, because she kicks ass. She's agile and powerful. The only downside is she's a glass cannon. A hit or two will cause her to die. But she's so fast and quick on her feet, it's hard to get hit. Throw in some poorly anime cutscenes that were in the CD games in the early 90s, and this game is a blast to play. Then let's take a look at Castlevania Dracula X. Since the TurboGrafx did not take off in America, nonetheless the CD add-on, Konami decided to adapt Rondo of Blood for the Super Nintendo, and without the CD you can't do cutscenes, and due to limited memory of the cartridge and the password system, no alternate routes to really find, although there are hidden stages you can find throughout the game. Also, Maria is no longer playable. You're going through this game as Richter Belmont only. How will this affect the game? Is that the only mark against the game? Let's find out. Oh, and I should tell you, the prize for the loser here gets to spend a glorious evening with Captain N's version of Simon Belmont. So here are the criteria I'm going to be judging these two games on. Story and presentation, gameplay and balance in the difficulty, and finally, how fun is that epic encounter with Dracula at the end of the game? Now, I know it's a bit unfair for the SNES to go against fully voiced and even dubbed anime cutscenes. Even if they're kind of cheap animated cutscenes, they are still cutscenes. So I will give it a bit of a curve in this department. If I believe that if Konami is trying its best to create something unique with hardware limitations, I will award the Super Nintendo version a point. I mean, look at what Konami did with Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles for the NES. So let's talk about the narrative here. The story is pretty much the same between the two games, minus a few small differences. It's been about 100 years since Simon Belmont sealed Dracula, and the people of Transylvania are at peace. However, a dark cult awakens Dracula, and he goes on about his usual genocidal rampage, burning down and attacking nearby cities, and kidnapping a bunch of women to have snacks on later. Unfortunately, two of the ladies in question are Richter Belmont's fiancée and her kid sister Maria. So Richter takes his family whip and sets out for Castlevania to rescue him. The story is the same, but what about the presentation? Well, the main story in the original Rondo of Blood is again done with anime cutscenes, but that's impossible for the Super Nintendo due to memory limitations. So instead, we get portraits that are pretty detailed for the Super Nintendo. I would say good job, Konami, if they weren't so freaking ugly. They could have at least tried to do something with the character models from Rondo, but no. Maria and Annette look really bad. So, no point for you, Super Nintendo, but I can say Konami did try. Let's take at another thing that classic Castlevania games did to help tell their story. One of the main ways of telling the story is looking at the castle position or the castle keep's position as you go through the stages. This makes you feel as you are getting closer to the Dracula fight as you go through these stages, as you see the keep get closer or the castle from a new perspective. Rondo of Blood shows you the castle in the very first few stages, and there are also some outside shots of it. Dracula X kind of doesn't. The only time it shows you the castle is the final stage, and it just reuses the map to show you the castle. I'm supposed to be entering the castle keeps here and taking a look at the castle in the background. The keep is way over there. Compared to how many shots we get of the outer castle shots in Rondo, yeah, it's kind of lazy here. With that said, Rondo does have this odd ship stage where you fight death that comes out of the middle of nowhere if you're taking the path straight through the castle. Also, take a look at Dracula X's clock tower position on the map. It's disconnected from the rest of the castle. The clock tower is supposed to be right next door to Dracula's room, so this makes little to no sense. Before I give Rondo of Blood a complete victory, there is one thing that Dracula X does better. It makes rescuing the girls a priority. While Rondo had 4 women to save and Dracula X only has 2, if you don't save them by the time you get to the clock tower, Annette gets possessed and turned into a witch that Richter will have to fight and destroy, and therefore get a bad ending. They would later make use of this in the PSP Rondo of Blood remake, where she gets turned into a succubus if you don't rescue her first. So good for them. Still, Rondo of Blood gets the story and presentation reward with the anime cutscenes that look beautiful, at least compared to these shots. And I can understand changing the character designs in some of the portraits. I mean, I'm pretty sure Capcom was issuing cease and desist letters with Ryu Belmont there, but they could have done better with the looks in the cutscenes. Ugh. Let's talk about the gameplay, and since I brought up rescuing Annette, let's start with looking at how you progress through the secret areas of each game and find each of the girls Dracula kidnapped. While Dracula X doesn't have the secret exit to every stage until you get to the death stage like Castlevania Rondo of Blood, it does have some additional secret stages. Fall off the floor in stage 3, you automatically get the bad ending as you go through the underground tunnels and not get to save any of the girls. Get through this part, great. Now you have to pick up a key and fight the duel hand and enter the waterway without dying. You gotta keep the key without dying through a boss and through a good chunk of the waterway without dying, because if you die, you lose the key. Yeah, be prepared to wear out the rewind feature if you're playing this on the Advanced Collection like I am. Once you get to the halfway point, you get to rescue Maria and basically get a, sorry Richter, your princess is in another castle. And yes, she does not become playable if you're wondering. This is Richter Belmont's story only. After that, complete the rest of the stage again without dying and without a sub-weapon, because you have to keep that key and use the key on this door. Now you have to go through halfway of this aqueduct stage and whip this area here and fall, and finally you get to rescue Annette. Your reward for that is an actual fight against death at the clock tower instead of Annette, and he's basically the same boss fight you fought in Rondo of Blood, only he cries when you whip him instead of spills out blood. And you get the best ending, which is basically just a different screenshot at the end credits. Really isn't worth all that frustration, especially if you're not using the rewind feature. Anyways, back on the subject, how do you save the girls in Rondo of Blood? Well, there are puzzles and hard to find areas, and with the exception of Maria and Annette, the other 2 are in sub areas, meaning you have to find secret exits to get into the stages even. With that said, Rondo offers a stage select, making it easier for you to undo mistakes, repeat areas, and look for secrets. The girls also have hard puzzles and times where you have to track along areas with the key, but not as freaking long as I just described, which is basically over 2 stages, and you are allowed to make mistakes and still rescue them. Unlike do a stage and a half without sub-weapons perfectly, because if you die, you lose the key. This is Adventures of Bayou Billy level of bullshit, and you know it, Konami. I am not cutting you any slack for this. As for the stage design, Neither game shares any of the stages. However, Dracula X seems to mix the stage ideas from Rondo of Blood into hodgepodges because of the more linear design. For example, Stage 2 begins with the aqueduct and then moves into the castle halls and continues on to the outside of the castle. It mixes both themes from Stage 2 normal from Rondo of Blood, which was Dracula's castle's hall, and Stage 2 secret from Rondo of Blood, which was the aqueduct. But these hodgepodge stages are not as fulfilling as Rondo, and oftentimes seems to be cheap knockoff stages. While Rondo is no cakewalk with its stage design, has some especially brutal challenges towards the end with the clock tower stage, and don't get me wrong, it's not easy, it can be quite hard. Here, the difficulty ramps up to almost impossible by the time you get started in Stage 2 and 3 with Dracula X, with cheap traps and ways of getting hit. The stages are harder, but not in a fulfilling, organic way, just cheap ways where the designers decide to frustrate you and knock off a life in a way that feels just plain unfair. And I guess I should address the only playing as Richter thing. Rondo again lets you select 2 characters, and while Maria may be a bit OP, her glass cannon status of only taking a hit or 2 before dying, as well as her sub-weapons take a lot of hearts to use, mean there are areas, despite her great speed and strength, it's better to go in with Richter because you're going to be taking a lot of damage either way. But not this time. In Dracula X, you're just Richter, and none of the stages give you any breaks, having you stuck as a Belmont character in the end. There are a lot of frustrations in the final stages. While Rondo and Blood, I stopped to try to capture just a few minutes and ended up playing for hours and doing multiple stages over and over again because I was enjoying myself. And in Rondo is hard because no version that Konami has released has the rewind feature. With Dracula X, I was glad to be over by the 3rd time I played, abusing the hell out of its rewind feature because I was more frustrated with the cheap kills than actually having fun or seeing it as a challenge. Oh well, maybe Dracula X can score at least 1 point with the final epic showdown with Dracula. No Castlevania game is complete without an epic showdown with the Count. Rondo of Blood is the perfect showdown with Dracula. He's incredibly tough to beat, especially as Richter, as like in the original, you have to both avoid his fireballs and target his head with the whip within a small amount of time. On top of that, he also now has a special meteor fireball that he throws in every 2 to 3 turns just to spike things up a bit. His second form isn't much to speak of. It's similar to the original Castlevania's final form, just bigger and more detailed dragon demon form that you have to keep hitting. To be honest, this fight does frustrate me a bit as Richter. I oftentimes wind up whipping out and just switching to Maria as her double jump can soar over those fireballs and give Dracula 2 to 3 hits to the head with her birds and 1 teleport move. And her speed makes running away from him at the end and firing out attacks way too easy. Still, if you want a decent but not impossible challenge, go in with Richter. Want to easily pound him into the ground? You got the choice to do that with Maria with Castlevania Rondo of Blood. So what about Dracula X? It was 2 years later. Surely they improved the what the hell is this? There is hard, and then there is Bayou Billy bullshit driving stages where you have no room to maneuver and 1 hit kills you, and that's what this final boss stage is. Oh, he still has the same fireball and meteor moves, but because you're not busy jumping on these freaking platforms, it's hard to line up a hit. Not that once you do that you can't actually hit him because your window of actually smacking him is ridiculously small. So, knockback into hole is a 1-hit kill. You can't line up hits easily at all, and his health is ridiculously large. This is freaking insane, and while I'm not the biggest fan of rewind features, when it comes to old school broken bullshit like this, rewind away. What about his second form? Actually, I'll have to admit, his second form is kind of fun. I like the idea at least. He turns into a bigger demon than before, but he can fly and throw fireballs. Hitting him a time or two causes him to land, and then you get to wail on him a while, but only for a while because he charges this beam attack that has you changing platforms to avoid it really fast. I like it better than the actual demon fight from Rondo of Blood. However, it does not undo this bullshit first form. Konami would have been better to have just fight his first form like Rondo, and then maybe have him shake the floor loose and have the second fight like this. But this floor design does not complement a traditional Dracula fight at all. Due to this overly frustrating first form, I cannot give Dracula X the win, despite having a really fun second form. Rondo of Blood is the perfect Castlevania game. It's hard and challenging, but never unfair. It has a load of secrets, and a second character that plays differently to shake things up. The stage design is perfect. To call Dracula X the same thing as Rondo of Blood is a disgrace to Rondo of Blood. And the fact that Dracula X released in the Americas in the 90s and it took over a dozen years for Rondo to get released on the PSP with an official American release and dub is disgraceful. Also disgraceful is you can get Dracula X in the Advanced Collection released on all platforms, which by the way, the Advanced Collection may have this turd, but it also has Aria of Sorrow, my favorite Castlevania game, so it's worth picking up. But anyways, this one is available for all systems. Rondo of Blood is currently only available on the PS4 in the Requiem of Sorrow collection, with it and its sequel, the stellar Castlevania Symphony of the Night. Come on, Konami, release this for other platforms. A classic like Rondo of Blood deserves to be on the Switch, on the PC, and on the Xbox, in my opinion. In the meantime, Dracula X, enjoy your date with Simon Belmont. I'd bring a whistle along if I were you. No, seriously, Gaston and Johnny Bravo could probably give lectures to this guy on how to treat women.
I'll take it. I wish the princess would fall head over heels for me.
If that's what you want.
Oh, Simon!
In the meantime, folks, let me know what you think of Castlevania Dracula X.